Hi there and welcome. This is Justin Cooper from Kennebunk Fire Rescue. Thank you for attending today's annual training on portable fire extinguishers as a refresher as part of our Bureau of Labor Standards requirement. Classes of extinguishers that we're responsible for are A, B, C, D, and K extinguishers. A Class A fire is ordinary combustibles such as paper, lumber, cardboard, plastics, and other household items. The extinguishing agent for a Class A fire is water. Our portable fire extinguisher is a pressure water can, typically holding 2.5 gallons of water, and sometimes we'll add Class A foam to this extinguisher. Water itself is about 70% effective at reducing BTUs and putting fire out. So for every 70 gallons that we would apply through our hose line, 30 gallons would be kind of wasted. When we add Class A foam to it, it becomes 97% effective. So 97 gallons would be effective, 3 gallons would be ineffective and roll off and cause water damage. Class B fires involve flammable or combustible liquids. The big difference there is just the temperature in which they ignite. We know gasoline is very volatile and ignites regularly, even in sub-zero temperatures. So that's a flammable liquid. Flammable liquids ignite under 100 degrees Fahrenheit and are basically dangerous all year long. Combustible liquids ignite over 100 degrees Fahrenheit and are less dangerous most of the time during the year, but both are in the Class B flammable or combustible liquids category. Our typical extinguishing agents are a dry chemical powder made up of potassium bicarbonate or ammonium phosphate. Another important consideration when dealing with a flammable or combustible liquids fire is to try and contain that fire prior to extinguishing. It's going to help with the actual extinguishment itself versus if the fire is somewhat three-dimensional or cascading down, a set of stairs or objects where it's harder to put it out. But if we can do some simple processes such as diking or damming, so using our hand tools to move some dirt or soil or whatever else is around in that area, or maybe calling for some sand, we can contain that fuel fire and then easily put it out with our Class B dry chemical extinguishing agent. Or we also have the ability to use Class B firefighting foam in our hose lines. A Class C fire or energized electrical fire involves anything really that's energized. So this could be appliances in a household, switches such as simple switches for lights or other appliances, panel boxes, power tools, or certainly machinery within a commercial fixture. Our typical extinguishing agent that we're going to use is a carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide takes away oxygen, putting the fire out. In some areas with a lot more sensitive electrical equipment, such as server rooms or computer rooms, we may run into a system such as a halon system or halon extinguishers or some other similar compound. Another important consideration with Class C energized electrical fires is whenever possible, if we can shut off the appliance or unit and isolate power to it and de-energize it, it becomes a Class A fire, and then we'd be able to use our water can or regular water. But it's important to determine whether we've actually been able to de-energize it and make sure that there's not some stored energy there. Class D combustible, also known as reactive metal fires. Magnesium, titanium, potassium, sodium, and lithium most often are found in metal shops. So our adjacent community, Biddeford, has numerous metal shops that work with these items, as well as they're very common in vehicle components such as our steering column. The extinguishing agent is a powdered copper metal or a sodium chloride. Those are the typical agents that are within these extinguishers. They're quite expensive, quite heavy. You'll also see in some industries they'll have 5-gallon buckets of sodium chloride, also known as salt. The thing to consider with that is, again, these are reactive metals, reactive with water. Salt has a natural tendency to pull water to it. So if they're storing salt buckets, they need to be sealed up with lids on them so they're not naturally pulling water into them. This agent doesn't necessarily dispel like out of a dry chemical extinguisher or even a CO2 extinguisher. The agent sort of pours out of the nozzle. So that nozzle wand actually needs to be brought right over the agent, and you just work it slowly back and forth to completely cover the agent, which as it reacts with the metal will form a crust over the top of it. Class K, or kitchen grease fires in a commercial kitchen setting. So this is different than a kitchen fire that we would encounter in a regular residential setting. In the commercial setting, they will have actual handheld Class K extinguishers and then a Class K hood system, like you see in this picture, where the nozzles are purposefully directed at or in appliances to put those fires out. Years ago, we used to use the same agent, dry chemical agent, as we would use in a Class B fire, but different restaurants started evolving using different um, fats to fry with that would fry things hotter and faster, making them more efficient. The dry chemical agent does nothing to cool the fire down or cool the grease down. So what occurred was firefighters were responding using dry chemical. The fire would initially go out but reignite because the agent wasn't doing anything to actually cool the grease. And this led to some serious fire losses as a result, and they had to come up with this Class K chemical. So what this does, in addition to knocking down the flame and forming a vapor securing blanket, the agent itself, as you can imagine, actually cools and aids in the extinguishing process. So it works by a process called saponification, where it actually reacts and makes soap. This is actually also very important because dry chemical powder, as you can imagine, when you discharge it, it basically goes anywhere and everywhere and takes a very long time to actually clean it up afterwards. If we have a fire in a commercial kitchen setting, we actually need to notify the Department of Agriculture. They come out and inspect the commercial kitchen, make sure everything is cleaned properly. Any open food that would be contaminated would be disposed of, and the Department of Agriculture will actually tell the restaurant or commercial kitchen setting when they can go back in service. So it's important that we notify them. The agent is a potassium acetate or citrate or carbonate or a combination of these chemicals. So quiz number 1. What extinguisher would you use if we respond to a private residence and encounter a grease fire on the stove? So as we just talked about, a Class K is used in the commercial setting. That's where we have a commercialized kitchen, and we would expect to see an actual hood extinguishing system and a Class K handheld extinguisher. In a regular residential setting, we wouldn't expect that at all. Hopefully homeowners have their own ABC dry chemical extinguishers, but for us responding on the fire department, we would choose to use the Class B dry chemical extinguisher and possibly even the Class C carbon dioxide extinguisher. We would also want to try and use the fire triangle or tetrahedron to our advantage prior to discharging the extinguisher. So some simple things that we can do to extinguish a grease fire in a pan on the stove would be to turn the burner off to that pan, apply the lid if we can, so that takes away the heat, takes away the air or oxygen, and that hopefully will put the fire out. If not, then we will discharge that dry chemical extinguisher, which will put the fire out very quickly and easily. It's important to note that if we used water in this situation, whether it would be a water can or some water from a nearby sink, we would actually cause this fire to grow exponentially bigger, possibly causing injury to ourselves and others, as well as a larger fire loss. Question number 2. What extinguisher would you use if you respond and encounter a TV that is on fire? What other actions should you take? That's right, you guessed it. A TV is considered a Class C energized electrical fire. If we can, the first thing that we want to do is try and unplug it. or isolate power to it with a breaker, the same that we would do for any other energized electrical equipment fire. We would use our carbon dioxide or BC dry chemical on this. But if we were able to truly isolate power, it has also become a Class A ordinary combustible fire and would be appropriate for water use. Our third question, what extinguisher would you use if you arrived at a vehicle fire and cannot extinguish the fuel portion of the fire with your hose line? Typical vehicle fires aren't like in the movies. We don't see vehicles exploding, blowing up. The fuel system typically is not involved in the fire. However, occasionally they are, whether the vehicle's been involved in a crash or something else that's disrupted the fuel system. That is a Class B combustible flammable liquid fire, more than likely probably a flammable liquid fire if it's involving gasoline versus diesel fuel. You'll notice this as you're trying to put the car fire out or vehicle fire out, and you're essentially pushing a liquid fire around with your hose line, having little to no effect on extinguishing it. We have a couple options. We can grab our Class B dry chemical extinguisher and put the fire out, or we could take another hose line where we would use a foam ejector and use Class B AR AFFF foam to extinguish that fire. Extinguisher operation. Before grabbing it off the fire truck, you once again want to verify that the unit is serviceable. So the extinguisher gauge is in the green, good to go. The pin was in place with the tamper seal, or if it was a CO2 extinguisher, that it has the appropriate weight. We don't want to grab an extinguisher that was partially discharged already prior to being used. This should be caught in our weekly checks of the apparatus and monthly checks of the station. Test the extinguisher before moving in on the fire. So we're going to follow the PASS acronym. So we're going to pull the pin, aim it at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle, sweep it side to side, and then don't turn our back on the fire when we think the fire is extinguished. So again, aim at the base of the fire. Typically we're going to start 8 to 10 feet away, sweep the agent side to side at the base as we're moving in and the fire is being extinguished, back out after extinguished. Again, don't turn your back on the fire and always leave yourself an egress route. As professionals, if the pin is not secured with a lanyard or another device, let's not throw it and discard it away, but calmly as professionals secure it in our pocket or somewhere else so that we can keep it for when we get that extinguisher recharged.
Fires kill more than 3,000 people in the United States each year. And if we're going to have to deal with these fires at home, in the office, in the shop, wherever, we have to know how to use a fire extinguisher. When you encounter a fire, you have to make a conscious decision. Is it worth me trying to put it out with a fire extinguisher? Should I just back out of there and call 911 and let the professionals take care of it? Every company is going to have someone in charge of checking these visually on a monthly basis. Every year you'll have them sent away to be checked by the professionals, but the monthly checks are pretty simple. Let's make sure that they're charged. Let's make sure all the parts are in place, that the hose is in good condition, that they're mounted in the right place. It's easy to lose track of one of these things if they get used. Make sure it gets put back, it gets recharged, because you never know when you're going to need to use one. If you happen upon a fire that is small enough for you to actually fight with one of these smaller fire extinguishers, all you have to remember is the acronym PASS. PASS helps us learn how to use this thing safely and not forget it when our mind is being preoccupied by the blaze. P is for pull, and we're going to pull the pin. The pin is here to make sure that this thing doesn't accidentally get discharged. It's really the only thing that's stopping these two levers from coming together and discharging the unit. When we pull the pin, make sure we're not squeezing together. We're just holding on the underside. It should be pretty easy to pull. It should have some sort of a tether on it or maybe a plastic band. Discard both of those things, and that's when we're going to go ahead and grab this nozzle and move on to our next letter. Grab this nozzle, and we're going to aim at the base of the fire, stay a nice safe distance away. And S is for squeeze. When we squeeze this handle, we'll discharge the unit. And the last thing we're going to do is sweep. We're going to sweep at the base of the fire and try to put out the flames from the bottom up.
extinguisher after use care. So for our B, C, and D extinguishers, we're going to notify the OIC that we've used it. We're going to tag the extinguisher with one of our out of service tags. We're going to replace that extinguisher on the apparatus with a full one that's good to go. And our OIC will schedule the extinguisher to be filled and serviced. For our Class A water can, we're going to refill those at the station. We have a couple different options. We have a repurposed DEF container labeled water can filling that's exactly 2.5 gallons, or we can just fill with a straight hose where the indicator tube, as water starts to come out of it, will indicate that the extinguisher is actually full.
In this video, we're going to cover how to refill a portable water extinguisher, or for short, a PW. Get a pair of channel locks, and you're going to start with loosening the nut by the handle at the top of the extinguisher. You want to loosen that nut all the way, and then remove the handle completely from the extinguisher. Next, remove the sleeve inside, and be careful because there is a washer that comes off of it sometimes. So be mindful that you don't drop it down into the extinguisher. This sleeve actually marks where the water level should be. So if you don't have gallon jugs, for accuracy, you can eyeball it, and as long as there's no water inside of the tube, you'll be okay. Next, we're going to start with filling it with the water. We want to fill it with the water before we fill it with foam, so that we don't activate the suds in the foam. It'll make it much more difficult to put it back in service. Again, I talked about accuracy with getting the right amount of water in here. If we don't have the right amount of water, we can either have too much pressure or too little pressure, causing our extinguishing agent to be cut short when we're operating the extinguisher. So we want to be real accurate here with the water and air ratio. Okay, once we get the water in there, we're going to add the foam. In our department, we use Class A foam. You can use Class B in water extinguishers, but the ratio is much different. You'll have to use much more foam and less water to make it the 2.5 gallons. We're going to use about 1/3 of a cup, which gets us in our 0.01 to 1% ratio for Class A foam. Once we have the water and the foam in there, we're going to replace the water level indicator tube, and we want to make sure that that gasket is there as well to keep the pressure inside of the extinguisher. Replace the handle and tighten the nut down. You don't want to over tighten the nut, but you do want it to be nice and firm. Next, we're going to use an air chuck to fill up with the Schrader valve. We're going to fill to 100 psi or until the indicator is within the green. You want to make sure not to press on and off, on and off. You want a constant flow of air so that you don't have foam backing up into your air chuck. We're within the green at about 100 psi. The pin is in place, and your extinguisher is ready to go back on your truck.